Well, today is Friday. It's Friday, October the 18th in 2024. And we welcome you to our Chapter 49 podcast. Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana. My name's Larry Lannan. I'm a volunteer with Chapter 49 and a retiree. We're happy you joined us. We took a week off last week. That was so I could visit some family out in South Dakota. But we welcome once again back to the podcast our chapter president, Duncan Giles. Welcome back, Duncan.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here and glad you didn't get snowed in South Dakota. You never know.
Well, it was October and it's been known to happen, although it was 70 degrees out there every day we were there. So the weather was very nice. But we have been to South Dakota in October and left early to avoid a blizzard. So it can happen. We actually moved up our visits earlier in the month of October because when we went later, that's when we had the chance of bad weather coming in there. I guess people who live in that area, it's just a way of life. They just understand that. So we're glad that uh, basically were patient with us. For those of you who are fans of the podcast, we do appreciate that very much. You've taken time out of your busy schedule to either watch or listen to our podcast. So I want to say right out up front that even though it's no longer in headlines in the news, we still have people hurting because of hurricanes Helene and Milton. And it wasn't just Florida, North Carolina, lots of Georgia, lots of other states are still cleaning up from these horrible storms and the damage they both did. So you're always welcome to contribute to any charity who would try to help those impacted the most. But if you do want to target your contribution to federal employees that are suffering because of this, you can do that by going to nteu.org. You'll find something right there where NTE was partnering with FEEA, which is the nonprofit that supports federal employees in times of need. And that particular charity partnering with NTEU will make an effort to target federal employees that are trying to get back on their feet as a result of these storms. So, Duncan, it's your chance to make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, the folks in Florida, Georgia, Carolina, Tennessee, Western Tennessee, this past week I reached out to former National NTU President Tony Reardon, who is in North Carolina, to make sure he and his family were doing okay. And he said they're fine. They are in the eastern part of North Carolina, but the western part, got hit. Got hit with a pretty glancing blow as well. So, it's something that FEA does a good job in assisting federal employees, and that's what we're here for. We're here to help each other. So, if you're looking to step up and give to this particular cause, FEA is a great vehicle to do so.
Yeah, we just wanted to make a reminder because we do mention it when it's in the news. And even though it's not in the news as much anymore, the need is still there. And there are so many people who are still hurting in all the states you mentioned. Those were devastating forms and storms in their own way in many different ways, many different forms. So we would like to encourage you to be supportive of those of us who are in the federal workforce who are trying to recover from these nasty storms. Let's move on to our issues of today. One issue we've talked about, really, if you think about it, Duncan, when we started the podcast in 2020, I think it was, we were dealing with COVID. So telework was at the center of everything because that's how people were getting work done. They couldn't come into the office because of the pandemic. Well, telework is still in the news. It's still an issue for people working in the federal workforce, and of course, people working for IRS and our contract with NTU between NTU and IRS, which governs how people have the availability of telework before them. So I guess, Duncan, what we want to do, that's a little bit of the history because we've had ups and downs with telework. We're almost entire telework because of a pandemic. Well, then we had the issue where we the agencies were encouraging people to come back into the office. Of course, with NTEU's contract with IRS, we do have some employee rights embedded in that. So with all that in mind, let's talk about where telework is today and the IRS and NTU's involvement in that, and where do you think telework is going from here? What are your views on that?
It's a really interesting time. Folks contact me, they'll send me articles about, well, this government agency is requiring people to come back into the office, and or this one, or things of that nature. And with our telework within the national agreement, it's pretty rock solid. It would literally take an act of Congress, a law by Congress, to abrogate that agreement. And so we don't anticipate that happening. Right now we're going to have, the telework as it is through that contract, and that contract goes through the end of September of 2026. Now, that being said, you get a new administration in, and they may have differing ideas on what they want. There's a lot of pressure from different interested parties, let's call them that want to have people come back to the office. Even though studies have shown telework is not only a great recruiting tool to bring people in, but a great retention tool, because people do not want to drive into the office when they can do the work just as easily at home. But there are an awful lot of interests out there that want people to come back in so that their businesses or buildings or whatever it is can flourish. And one of the interesting things is, if you have a change in how people view telework and say, okay, we want to bring people in now. Well, you've got a problem. For the past couple of years, our facilities folks, in conjunction with GSA, have been reducing our workspace imprint, the number of square footage we have, when it comes to hoteling or desk sharing. So that's not something that can be changed on a dime. If they say, okay, everybody come in tomorrow, literally the IRS in most places could not do it, because we don't have the space to put everybody in at once. And those processes, for those of you who've changed PODs over the years, they're not fast. It is a lengthy process because they want to make sure it's done right, it's equitable, it's honest, and it literally takes years from start to finish. So, we're not anticipating anything changing now. We just came out of midterm bargaining in the contract this past summer, and nothing has changed really with the teleworking. So we would just want to assure people that, in the IRS, in the service, this is not changing anytime soon. So don't panic from what you see, is happening in other agencies. Now, for non-bargaining employees, I would hope it doesn't change, but it possibly could. There could be an edict to come down from the commissioner's level that says, hey, okay, we're going to bring non-bargaining employees back into the office 5 days a week. I've seen that happen with a couple of federal agencies now. So we hope that doesn't happen, but that's a possibility. But for bargaining unit employees who are covered by that agreement, don't anticipate changes anytime soon.
Yeah, there are a couple of things going on there, Duncan. I think you touched on both of them, but they're a bit contradictory, because one is this push by certain people within government and certain pressure groups of bringing federal employees back to the office. On the other hand, the agencies are also under pressure to lower their rent costs, which I know with IRS and many other agencies that the number one line item in your budget would be staff, and the second line item would be rent. You have to go way down to find the next one. So rent is a big expense. And so there's been really, when telework started in the 90s, the agency made it clear to NTU that the long-term goal was to try to reduce space. Hadn't always worked out that way in the long term so far, but I think the pressure is on to do that. So you cannot disincentive telework and reduce your space when you're hiring people. I mean, that's just the numbers don't add up, do they?
They don't. And here at the IRS, we do try and have the numbers add up correctly. But it's just not doing that. It's it just if you're wanting to bring more people in, and you're wanting them to have a place to work and you're reducing space, well, there's going to have to be something that's going to have to give. And most of the time, it's, hey, let's get them on telework as soon as we can.
Let's move on to another issue. And this one I want to tread carefully on because NTEU has been sending out emails with links and on the website and other places where there are webinars on there. And there are some really useful webinars. But Duncan, we do have to be careful because we are in a political season. And we're going to talk a little more about the Hatch Act later in the podcast as we have in each one up toward the election. But talk about these webinars, how useful they can be, but how careful employees must be as to when and where and how you watch these webinars.
Yeah, as the technology evolves and we're able to do more things like this, NTU has really stepped up and started doing webinars on things that may be of interest to federal employees that they can't really share over government email on government equipment or on government time. So basically what happens is National NTU sends these notices out and says, hey, we're going to be having a webinar, on this time and date, or it'll be recorded and you'll be able to get it off of the NTU website. And these are things that, like I said, are very interesting, can be very helpful, as you noticed. But you can't do them on government time, government property, or on government equipment. So we want to make sure that folks are very well aware of that. Good information out there on the NTU website, but be mindful when you access it.
Let's move on to something else because we always have to talk about the budget. We haven't had to talk about it for a while because the continuing resolution is in place now until December 20th. And Congress will not come back into session until after the election. I believe it's, yes, November 12th was when they're due to come back to Washington. Have to have a budget by December 20th. And some agencies are already hurting because last year's budget is not enough to carry them through with the mission that they have, even in the current fiscal year, which began October 1st. It's what's called a lame duck session. There'll be plenty of people in Congress who either aren't running again or lost their election, and they're still voting. And the president, who's not running again, will be a lame duck as well during this period. So a lame duck Congress will be making the decision on what kind of budget federal agencies will have in the current fiscal year. Talk about what's going on there.
Yeah, that, because Congress, unfortunately, as per their usual, could not get a budget passed for our agency and basically most agencies out there. So now they're going to be coming back after the election. And as you said, in a lame duck session, there are going to be some happy campers and there are going to be some very unhappy campers, depending upon how the election goes, whether people won their seats, didn't win their seats, that sort of thing. And they're going to have just over 5 weeks to be able to go from the start to the finish. And so that's a very short time frame to be able to get stuff together. Right now, the staffs are still working, even though Congress is not in session. The staffs of the appropriations committees, the leaderships, things of that nature, are still talking to each other, still working with each other, trying to figure out where they might be. In past years, we've had what are called omnibus bills or minibuses, breaking it up into smaller groups. But what happens with that is that you get a lot of folks in Congress who are upset and want to pass them individually. So there's going to be a lot of give and take in this in a very short period of time for folks who are still going to be uneasy about, where the direction is going in Congress and in the White House, depending upon the results of the election and their political affiliation. But one thing is certain is we need to get it done. We really don't want to see another continuing resolution until early next year or something of that nature, just because of the fact that we're not properly, we need the proper funding. And if you do it at the previous year's rate, you're probably going to end up coming short. IRS, for a great example, continues to hire as we have been, and we need the money from that budget so we don't have to dip into the funds from the Reduction Act monies that we have, which should be part of our regular budget that we're paying our employees. So we need to get Congress to, as usual, do what they need to do, and it'll probably be, as has been the past several years, a year-end rush to pass an omnibus bill that's going to cram just about everything together and try and force it to pass, and hopefully it'll have the proper funding for what we need to do to continue to grow as an agency.
Yeah, just as a reminder, one reason we're concerned about this is that the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the President all have very different views on how much this budget should be for each agency. So getting a budget consensus or agreement together is going to be a challenge. It can be done, but if people are willing to, do that word you have to have in a democratic society, compromise to get something done in the end. So we will be watching that very closely after the election. We're also into a season for the combined federal campaign. It's an annual ritual for those who work for the federal government. It's basically the way that the federal government gets together to bring charities together, nonprofit organizations, to support them in one campaign rather than all of them having separate campaigns. So I know NTEU for a long time has been a partner with the agency and IRS and others to support the combined federal campaign.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, there are so many choices now. There used to be, back when I started, there were a lot fewer, but now there's more and more choices that you can choose to help. Basically, that's what it amounts to, is how can we help our planet, our fellow man, whatever it might be, in the type of thing that you want to contribute to. And the combined federal campaign is a great way to do it. Very easy to do. You can figure out which agency that you want your money to go towards, however much you want to put in. And it's just a great way to help out and to give back. So we're very much in favor. When I say we, I'm talking about IRS, NTU, federal employees as a whole are very happy to be a part of this, to be able to give back to the communities that are in need.
I mean, I've had a relationship with the combined federal campaign going back a long way. My father, when he worked at the Defense Department, ran the combined federal campaign at what we used to call the Finance Center out in Lawrence, Indiana. I would call it the DFAS operation, so he had talked about that with me from when I was yay high. And myself, I've also been involved with the combined federal campaign when working at IRS. So it's something NTEU supports, and we would suggest not just those working actively, but even retirees like myself. You have options of taking money from your retirement and money and putting that into the combined federal campaign if you choose to do so. We did talk about the fact that the Hatch Act is something we'll talk about in every podcast until the election comes up. We just want people to be very careful. We've been talking about various aspects of it for the last several weeks. I think the emphasis we want to make this time on this podcast, Duncan, is just this. If you have any question on the Hatch Act, if you think anything you're considering doing might dovetail or be a problem in terms of compliance with the Hatch Act, we recommend that anybody who's a member of NTEU anywhere at the IRS, really any other agency that may be watching or listening, represented by NTEU, if you have any questions, the best place to go is your local chapter. NTEU chapters know about this, and if they don't know the answer, their NTEU has very good people who will get the answer to you. We don't want anybody getting in trouble over a Hatch Act violation, particularly inadvertently. So I guess our point here, and I'd like you to talk about this, is if you have questions or concerns about the Hatch Act, always talk to your local NTEU chapter.
Yeah, those are great points, Larry, because as you mentioned, one of the key things, inadvertently. Oh, I didn't realize, or I thought I could do this, or can I do this? Can I not do that? Those are always, questions that NTU chapters are happy to answer, because we don't want anybody to get in trouble for doing anything that they shouldn't be. The civil service is nonpartisan. We're here to help the American people. We don't want to, come off as supporting one party or the other. So we want to make sure that we are within the bounds of the Hatch Act rules, um, in what we can do and what we can't do. So your local chapter here in Indiana, I'm always willing to help answer questions and have been. And across the country, all of our chapters, whether they be in IRS or Customs and Border Protection, whoever it might be, any of the other agencies that we represent would be able to help you out with any questions on this. If you have, something that you're unsure about, what you can do and what you can't do. So we want to err on the side of caution to help you out, to make sure that you're doing the right thing, to be able to support your rights as an American to, be politically involved, but do it the right way as a federal employee.
I want to talk about something that has made the news recently. Um, the FEMA is an agency that is really, it's an amazing. The people who work at FEMA are just amazing people. Most of us who work in government, we go to work, we work, 8 to 5, whatever our schedule may be. They're more flexible now than they used to be, but you work certain hours and you're off certain hours. People who work at FEMA can be called at any time to go anywhere where there's an emergency. And they just do amazing work, and it's really difficult work, and it's not easy. But yet, Duncan, we have found some very troubling situations. There was one particularly in North Carolina where a man was arrested for making threats against FEMA workers who were trying to help people. I think it was in North Carolina in that particular case, but it's not the only situation that's come up where crazy online allegations are made that are unsubstantiated. And then FEMA workers end up coming under attack, danger. I mean, it's just, and there was one situation where the FEMA workers had to pull back from a particular area where the people needed help. They couldn't get the help because of these crazy rumors that were going around. So talk about just how crazy it is that any federal employee should face a threat. We at IRS understand that. We've been dealing with it for a long time. But for FEMA employees to do it, that's just off the scale.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. It truly is. For these folks, like you said, that are very dedicated. And we have a lot of agency folks that are basically, help FEMA out when they have times of need. And I know several of our other agencies do that as well, that they're, do what we can to help folks out. Our current national area vice president and former Chapter 49 vice president, Susan Wright, used to do FEMA work. She was on a list that when they needed help so they could answer tax questions or things of that nature, because all sorts of things come up in these types of disasters. But for anybody, any federal employee, for doing their legal job, to be, threatened, things of that nature, like you said, in IRS, it should never happen, but unfortunately it does. But for somebody from FEMA who is out there strictly to help people, that's all they want to do, is they're out there to help people, to be threatened because of some crazy stuff off of the internet that's being perpetuated that's absolutely incorrect. And I give you the $750 is all you're going to be able to get. No, that's $750. That's all you're going to be able to get right now, but there's so much more that FEMA can help with once you fill out the forms. And what are those FEMA folks there for? To help you fill out those forms so they can help you even more. And for them to be placed in any sort of possible physical danger or actual physical danger in a few cases so far is absolutely asinine to me. And it just speaks badly of a certain segment of the American public. If you don't like the government, you don't think the government is doing right, understand that. You want to voice your protest? Absolutely. I understand that that's your right as an American to do that. But to physically threaten the employees that are doing their lawful job and are just working to try and help others, whether it be at FEMA, whether it be at IRS, folks who are revenue officers, uh, folks who are revenue agents, folks who are on the phones that get these harassing, calls, threats, things of that nature. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And it's just a shame that a bigger percentage of our society than it used to has come to take this as something that they can do. And they should be prosecuted. To me, they should be prosecuted every chance to the fullest extent of the law.
That's so well stated, Duncan, and time for your final comment. Sorry, got you at a bad time there.
Yeah, I was going to say, my final comment today is, on doing something you enjoy. When you're off work, you need to recharge your batteries, do something you enjoy, whether it's, going to visit grandchildren, children and grandchildren, whether it is, okay, it's probably not going to be controlling the weather. I would doubt that it's going to be, dancing in place for 37 minutes, but it might be. Or, going to a beach and collect some rocks. My beautiful and wonderful wife, Kim, likes to collect rocks from beaches. She had some stress in her job. So we took off last weekend, drove up to Lake Michigan. And basically she was able to spend, an hour or so on the beach in the water, and her feet in the water, collecting rocks that she likes to do. And it's very peaceful for her. And I was so happy to be able to give that to her to help her with that. Anything that you can do to help clear your mind, to make yourself feel better, is something that you need to do. We all have stressful jobs. We all need to have that kind of release to relax ourselves. And, so I very much encourage folks to do that.
Good for the soul and just good for the state of mind. So, yes, I'm glad to hear that Kim had a chance to do that and you were able to help her with that. My final comment, by the way, I went back and listened to the last podcast. I was talking about baseball. I was getting everybody mixed up. Anybody who heard what I said about baseball 2 weeks ago, if you were confused by what I said, don't feel badly because I was talking about the Astros and Detroit Tigers, and I got all mixed up. Of course, they're both out of the playoffs now. So just wanted to let you know that every now and then this old retiree does get a little mixed up, and hopefully I'll get this one right. The Federal Times is a long-time stalwart of the federal employee press. They've published a weekly publication for weeks, a print edition. They're online. They just do very good reporting on issues affecting federal employees. Well, the Federal Times has recently done a survey of more than 960 workers who applied for a new job out of the federal workforce since 2021. That's when agencies were first formally told to initiate return to office. And we talked about that earlier. We were almost entirely on telework because of the pandemic. And then as the pandemic ebbed, then the pressure was on to get people back into the office. Well, when that happened, these 960 people who were surveyed by the Federal Times basically said that this impacted their decision to leave the federal service. So that includes jobs in and out of government, suggesting that perhaps some substance to the often repeated claim, this is from the article from Federal Times, this does back up the claim that you've heard that employees will look elsewhere if they feel re-entry plans back to the office clash with their own beliefs about how federal agencies should broker telework agreements. So I think you could say NTEU is way ahead of the curve on this. We have preserved the rights people have for telework in our contracts, even through all this. Now, what'll happen after 2026, September, we don't know. But we do know that up until this point, NTEU has preserved those rights in our contract with the IRS and with many other federal agencies protecting that right to telework. So, Duncan, I think that survey of 960 people who left the federal service, more than a half saying that this lack of ability to use telework the way they had been accustomed to doing so, and this push to get them back into the office, this impacted their decision to leave federal government employment. That's not a good sign, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. And you see that more and more with people saying, okay, if this is going to happen, I'm going to look for something else. I'll retire, do what I need to do. Because, again, it goes to peace of mind and what they want to do with their lives. And it's not be in the office 5 days a week.
And you just heard Duncan Giles, our chapter president for NTEU Chapter 49, and you have been listening to the Chapter 49 podcast. We do appreciate the fact that you've taken some time out of your busy schedule to listen or watch. We do this. Duncan takes time out of his busy schedule as a chapter president, and I take time out of my retirement, my busy retirement, to make sure that we get this produced as often as we can. We don't make every week like we didn't last week, but we try to make most weeks to update you on what's going on. So again, we thank you very much for watching and listening. Please be safe and be kind.